So hello and welcome everybody to the Access to Justice for Young People, which is a very global kind of commentation, like a title for what we're doing. We're very lucky. So my name is Mary Birdsell. I'm a lawyer and the executive director of a legal clinic here in Ontario called Justice for Children and Youth. We provide direct legal representation, public legal education, community development, and law reform work for children, people under the age of 18, and then young people who are experiencing homelessness or have no immigration status up to about 24, 25. So that's my own little quick note. We are very lucky in a way because we have 3 presenters in our session, so we have a little bit more space, which is lovely, physically and intellectually maybe. But we also have 3 very different kinds of presentations, which I think I've felt very lucky because it's given me some really new things to think about and some ways of thinking about all of the things, including how law functions, what we mean by legal services and legal contexts, as well as what access means. And I have several B's that are regularly floating in my bonnet about that. And the sort of recognition of how broad the issues really are and need to be for real transformation. And we're also going to talk about, Diana's going to talk about transformation of systems. So having said that, what we're going to do is have each of our presenters tell you the really surface level information in their presentations. You have access to all of the materials through the program information and attendee information. And so then we'll have them do their presentation for 15 to 20 minutes. Ask questions about that presentation before we start the next one. So we're breaking it up a little bit differently, and we're going to try and preserve about 10 minutes at the very end so we can sort of regroup and et cetera. We didn't want people to forget where they were with one presentation until we went to the next. So we're going to start, and I'm not going to read the impressive bios of our presenters. I'm going to leave that to you, but our first presenter is Kristen Wallwork. From Australia. She's the CEO at the South Asian Monash Legal Service. And then we're going to go to Nat at Youth and Family Justice, and then Diana is going to wrap the third one up for us. Okay, I'll move out of the way.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. It's very exciting to be showcasing one of our most iconic programs here today, and great to be in a room full of really interesting, dynamic people. I'm really pleased to hear that I have up to 20 minutes because I've culled this a lot. It's only 13 minutes, and that was the length of my speech at my 40th birthday 10 years ago, so they had to suffer. I'd like to first acknowledge the lands we are meeting on on this traditional territory of many nations, and now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit and Métis people. Sorry if I haven't pronounced that properly. As with Indigenous land in Australia, I'm fortunate to enjoy the opportunity to work, play and rest here. I'm also fortunate to be back in Canada, having lived here 27 years ago, exactly 324 moons. I'd just like to comment on Chief Justice reflections yesterday, which hopefully those that heard them are going to hear what he had to say really resonate through my presentation today around civil education, young people, integrating civil education in the school system, building bridges, common ground, developing an understanding of our civil institutions and recognising that people can't respect them or engage in them if they don't understand them. So he was just speaking my language, which was fantastic. I always start with a precursor before presenting on, and which is quite similar to what the Chief Justice was talking about when I present on sporting change. And that's by saying that the law scaffolds our lives from the moment we get up in the morning to the moment we go to bed at night, and it starts from a very early age. We get out of bed, we have to get to work, we have to get to school, we have to pay for bus fares or toll fares, we get to school or work and we have to have respectful relations, we have to do what we're meant to do when we're there, we come home, we go through that process again of getting home, And then we're in the home, and there might be issues around relationships, family violence. Our parents might be dealing with debt or tenancy issues, and children have things going on at school. And this starts from a very, very young age, and yet I know from my schooling that wasn't ever instilled on me. And one of the things I'm going to talk about in this presentation is also that we have very young people absorbing what's going on in their parents' lives but not really understanding it, and that's something we need to give them the capacity to do. So, who are we? I just want to quickly touch on where I come from. So our organisation is South East, we've changed our name 5 years ago and I still don't know it, South East Monash Legal Service, and we are the third oldest community legal centre in Australia. We're 51 years old. We're a large centre in the southeast of Melbourne. We have the oldest clinical program in Australia, which is a partnership with Monash University. Sporting change came about because I had a former community development worker who used to come to my office every week with 500 ideas, and I would ask her to leave my office. And then one day she came in and said that she had been working with some Pacifica Island youth, and their parents had asked for some support around their engagement in the justice system and disengagement with working with the justice system. And she said to me, oh, you know, they're playing basketball, and I was thinking how I can integrate something to do with their basketball. And it hit this big bell for me because many years ago I ran a women's legal service in the north of Australia, in Katherine, in the middle of nowhere, and I'd started a Australian football team, women's Australian football team, and used that to teach young girls, Aboriginal girls, about family violence and consent and all those sorts of things. So, yay, we did that. We went off and got a significant grant from our legal regulator that puts out grants every year. The idea of sporting change is that we're using sport as the backdrop to educate. It's a multifaceted program, engaging schools, sporting codes, various sporting codes, and obviously a community legal service. The idea is that the kids are getting out of the classroom, it's great for blood flow, there's social cohesion, which improves knowledge and instilling knowledge. It's on site at the school, it's multidiscipline, it's in the afternoon. They have to do 2 terms with us. And so over a couple of weeks, we have sporting codes come in, we have a community development worker, a youth worker, and we teach the young people very discreet messages about laws that impact them currently. And we obviously use sport as a metaphor. A couple of examples of what that looks like is police powers. So we use soccer as police powers, red carding, yellow carding, working with referees and coaches about engaging with authoritarian figures. We also have used fencing. Anyone that knows fencing, that swordy thing. Before you go into a bout, you need to tap swords to consent to the bout. So we obviously teach the kids around respectful relationships using that as a metaphor. And then in addition, we have a school lawyer who is that they're involved in the program in order to demystify the idea of what a lawyer is and to get young people engaged with the lawyer, but also they're available to any other school student at any time. So that's sporting change. So just a couple of comments about the early days. The key to this program is that it's separate from the school, and that was a very difficult paradigm disconnect to navigate for the first couple of years with the school. They often tried to use us as a disciplinary measure by, right, you're going to be attending sporting change after school. There's a big difference between teaching community development than teaching secondary education. So we've had to really grapple with that and get the school to understand that. To ensure the success of this program, the students had to see it as more than free food and free sport. The reality is that some of the students that have attended are students that don't have access to things like sport after school. That's okay, but they needed to engage in also that learning component. And I also just want to touch on the age thing. So originally when we started this program, there's two things that we thought we were going to do and then quickly pivoted away from. One was we were going to target disengaged 15 to 16-year-olds that were potentially, it's sort of in and out of the school system. And we were also targeting two groups, the Pacific Islanders, because that was a particular demographic in the region, the school that we first went into, and people from Afghan backgrounds, and that's just a group that we're working with. However, what we quickly realised is that by 15, 16, students are at that Robert Frost moment where they're sort of taken the road most sought by, and that's engaging in the criminal justice system in this context. And they're also at that age where they're not really listening anymore. They're doing their own thing. So we've lowered the age to year 8 and year 9, which is 13 and 14, fresh, still able to cognitively take on what we're teaching, but hopefully sort of at that gateway where we can stop, de-escalate things happening. So this is the team at the top with the banner. On the left with the curly hair is Liam, he's a lawyer. On the right is Nabila, she's a manager of integrated practice. Ariz is in the middle there, he's a lawyer. And then we've got Millie, who's our youth worker. And you'll note also that our organisation is very multicultural, which is fantastic for the region that we serve. So we established early on a theory of change, and that was about 7 years ago, and that's held true to today. It's still working. We're undertaking our third evaluation, which I'll touch on at the very end. Obviously, we established outcomes we wanted to measure and also impacts that we wanted to have. I'm going to put up even though I've now been given an extra 5 minutes, I'm not going to take it. I'm going to try and keep succinct because the elephant in the room is that it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon. However, that's up there. So on the left, my left, yes, the outcomes that we have measured. And I can say categorically this has been a hugely successful program and has continued to attract funding. And I'm not going to talk about funding, happy to take questions about that, but safe to say it's been a hugely successful program. And then obviously on the right-hand side is that sort of high-level impact stuff that we wanted to contribute to, that we set up when we did the theory of change. Just a couple of unintended consequences that I wanted to highlight. They include, so I mentioned earlier about changing the focus of who was doing the program. What the program has done has attracted kids from across sort of diverse social and economic divides and barriers, and it's broken down that sort of social interaction. We've also seen a really lovely sort of social change leaders of tomorrow, because we've had kids that are more engaged in education and seeing, the complexities of their peers and sort of taking that on board and thinking about that and reflecting on that and where they want to go. We've had students come and do placements at SMLS. We've had students get work with the sporting codes. And the great thing is we've had students go on and currently doing law degrees and social work degrees and youth degrees. So, and these are kids where, it was sort of pivotable around, and we'll hear from them shortly. And then these are the sorts of areas, laws, that our school lawyer has been assisting. We have 2 schools at the moment. We've been in 5 schools and we're probably getting funding for a few more, but I can't disclose that. But these are the sorts of issues that the students come and see us about. And I want to come back to my point earlier at the very start where I said that young people sit in homes and observe what's going on in their families and they've got nowhere to go. So we actually have students now, for all of us lawyers, there's lots of sort of ethical there's not ethical grey areas, it's how we navigate some of the ethical conundrums we have. So we have young people come and say, can you explain this to me? And it might be that mum's got a family violence order. Now, some puritists might say that's third-party advice. We try and keep it around sort of educating and having a confidential conversation with that person. So, and including things around debt or my brother was removed from the family home of child protection. This makes a difference. It really does make a difference to young people and how they're navigating these really complex things in their family homes. Now, we don't want to hear from me the whole time, so let's hear from the students themselves.
Sporting change is great for like hanging out with friends, playing games, and learning new things.
Getting to play different sports every single week is like my favorite thing about sporting change, and I like a little circle of learning law.
So they can understand how their rights work and like be a great person in the community.
Basketball is one of like the best games to learn the law.
Amazing.
All sports help me, but soccer helps as with the rules and like people having certain roles and like how people interact.
Just do one more.
One thing that I learned in sporting change was the driving laws, because I'm getting my hours soon, so it was really nice to know what ages that I meant to move up to red piece or apply for my green piece. And my favorite thing about sporting change was meeting the new people, like the lawyers.
Something I learned about the law has to be employment. Like, you have the right to ask about your payment and when you want to quit. And you don't have to, like if you're casual, you can quit on the spot without giving a notice.
I learned that when you're dealing with the police, you can give them your name and address if you have to.
So, that's just a snippet of lots of interaction with, recordings that we've taken from the beautiful students we've seen over the years. I just want to touch on the role of the lawyer now. So in my final reflection, so I'm going to just go through two very quick case studies so you can get a taste of what sort of matters that we're assisting with. So the first case involves Han. He arrived to Australia with his mum and dad and his sister. His mum left his father due to family violence, and he could see his mum struggling, so he decided to go and get a summer job. And so he got a job in a commercial bakery through one of his friends at school. And that commercial bakery, they had no air conditioning, ventilation, nothing. So all the boys were made to take their tops off and work with their tops off. They had a terrible boss who would chastise them and call them horrible names, and they were also paid a set amount. So if they worked a long day, it meant that they were being paid under the award wage and any of the normal entitlements. Han ended up coming and seeing us, and through the course of our school lawyer, we've assisted him with a WorkSafe complaint, which is the workplace regulator, complaint to the council, a report to the Fair Work Ombudsman about the working conditions, as well as at Fair Work Commission, which is our tribunal for workplace matters, and we've settled that matter with a payment from the employer. Also, due to these circumstances, he suffered a lot of absenteeism at school, and with the support of our youth worker, she has encouraged him to stay on at school and to complete his exams, which he has finished recently. And also, just as a side note, we've started a new program, a climate justice program, and this matter has been referred to that team to look at the climate justice issues around workplaces. The second case study was a around 15, 16-year-old female who identified as a lesbian. At her workplace, her boss started to use sexualised comments to the point of bordering on sexual assault, wanting to see her and her girlfriend together and all these things. We took on that matter as a sexual harassment matter. That settled for $35,000, as well as training in the workplace on positive duty, which is now law in Australia. The very important part about that case is that the student felt so empowered to be able to advocate for herself. Resourcing and sustainability. So as I touched on, this has been a very successful program and has attracted the attention of government and other funders. However, with all our programs, I just want to quickly acknowledge Ashley Noonan, who's in the room. She's my 2IC Deputy CEO, and she has overseen the incredible evolution of sporting change. So I don't take credit for this other than the Catherine idea. But we always embed an idea of sustainability into any of the programs we're developing. So we have we go to the schools and we do get contribution from some of our schools, and we are growing that contribution so that we don't have to rely on government and like one-off funding or limited funding. The final thing I just want to comment on is this is a complex program, and it's complex because of the interrelationships. One of the things that we had to tackle early on was the issue of keeping the integrity of our professional obligations. This is a legal service. We are a legal service providing this program. We are very protective of the rule of confidentiality, and that comes in conflict with the obligation for mandatory reporting in schools. We went through a very rigorous process with the Education Department to come up with a school agreement that the school councils sign, in which we obviously make sure the children are safe at all times, and we've got processes in place to deal with in the event that things are disclosed to us. However, the most important part about this program is that it's independent from the school whilst being on the school, and we've retained the integrity of our professional obligations. And I just wanted to note that we're currently undertaking our third formal evaluation ethics approval from Monash and the State Education Department. So that'll be published in the next few months, and happy to share. Full stop. Thank you.
Yeah, so opening up for questions, if we could take about 5 minutes or see how it goes if people have questions.
Could you talk a bit about what the program delivery actually looks like? Is it like you play sports and then there's like a curriculum, or is it more informal where the youth can
Sure.
just come and talk?
Yes. That's probably the part that I culled. Probably an important part. Do you want to answer that, or yeah?
Yeah, so the people online can hear you.
Is it on? Yeah. Yeah, so we started out, where are you? Quite formal, and learnt very quickly that at the end of a school day, kids are not interested in another class. And so we have changed it up, and we whittled down our long form content into really key messages so that we could measure the impact and the retention of that knowledge, as well as obviously we started off with the legal education and then did the sport. We realised, no, we need to do the sport first so that people can get their blood flowing, as Chris mentioned, and be ready and eager to learn after the sport. We also have some afternoon tea as a snack, and had to very specifically tell people that they couldn't say that their favourite thing was the food.
So it's about 2 hours after school?
Yeah, yes. It's just almost 2 hours after school. They come to the school gym, we use the school equipment, and the coaches join us, and we work with the coaches to co-develop the content so that we're using the right metaphors. That's quite a process as well. And yeah, so sport, and then food and delivery. And it's much less formal than a classroom setting. We sit around a table, we share food, we discuss the content, and we have lawyers answering questions. It's really dynamic environment.
Great. Thank you.
I have a question.
Okay, sure.
So I was curious about how, so you just answered part of my question, which is that there are lawyers present there to answer specific legal questions. If people have individual legal issues, can you talk a little bit about how you navigate that? Well, don't tell me your whole legal problem right here in public, and whether the lawyer is then available to have that consultation right away, or just how you navigate that.
Yeah, so not right away in that context, but the lawyer is there all day on that same day, and we are embedded in the wellbeing team. So we will link into the wellbeing team to go back to that student, and often we will take appointments during the day, not during, say, lunch or recess, so that to keep the anonymity and also safety and all of those things, so that, yeah, students feel comfortable coming to see us. Yeah.
Thanks. It's really great sounding program. I'm curious, you're affiliated or working with the Monash Law School Legal Clinic. So are students, law students then, taking part in this as part of their clinical legal education, and then, what's their role and in terms of, training them up for that? I
feel like you've been given the Dorothy Dixer, because Ash was like, someone's going to ask about the students. Yeah, so we were the original site for the Monash Law program, and we still host the Prof Prac students. And yes, up until COVID they were placed as part of during the Sporting Change program. There's been a pivot away, but we've got them to do community development. Like, we're quite, as an organisation, committed to the students when they do their CE component, understanding what community education is. So we will get them to do things like develop, they don't always work out very well, but develop education activities that then are implemented in this program. But they were, prior to COVID, attending Sporting Change as part of their community engagement. We just haven't, because we're the city of the longest lockdowns, and it's been a very slow sort of return to normal in Melbourne. But that is the plan, to bring them back into that. Yeah. No more? Thank you. Thank you.
It's got to be brought up on here.
Sorry.
Oh, no problem. Is this yours?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Okay, hi everyone. I'll just say thanks for being here. Thanks to the organizers, wherever they are, and the techie and the panel. So today I'm going to talk to you about a public legal education program called Inusuktinut Maliga Liri Nirmut Ikayuktit. And this was a public legal education program, a plea program, created for and by urban Inuit youth in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. And Ottawa sits on the traditional territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So the name of the program was chosen by the youth participants, and the language is a particular dialect of Inuktitut, which is the language of the Inuit here in Canada. And in English, it loosely translates to youth justice outreach. So obviously, Inuktitut is not my first language. I am not Inuit, in fact, and I think before I go any further, I should position myself. So my name is Nat. I am a queer, white settler lawyer and PhD student. I work for both the Department of Justice Canada as a lawyer and with the Ontario Justice Education Network, OGEN, who we've heard a bunch about over the course of the conference. OGEN provides public legal education for youth across Ontario in schools and in the community. So I'll be speaking about both of these organizations, institutions, but I'm not going to be speaking for either of them. I'm speaking for myself as a PhD student who had the good fortune of working with OGEN on a project that was funded by the Department of Justice Canada. But my words are my own. I'll just wanted to say that, disclaimer. So the program I'm going to be talking to you about was an OGEN program that had 3-year funding from the Department of Justice Canada, and it was part of a broader project called the Plea for Racialized Communities of Youth project. And the goal of the project is to partner with community organizations and create, quote, culturally relevant and responsive plea programs focused on the specific needs of racialized African, Caribbean, Black, and Indigenous communities of youth living in primarily urban areas in Ontario. So in Ottawa, OGEN partnered with the Inuktitut Center for Inuit Children, Youth, and Families. And Inuktitut is a multi-service Inuit organization that provides cultural, recreational, educational, and support services for young Inuit in Ottawa. OGEN was very fortunate to partner with Inuktitut. They've been incredibly supportive, and they're eager to continue the relationship, which is great. So for those not familiar with the culture, with the Inuit culture, I'll just give a quick background. By all means, do more research. This is very sort of quick and not comprehensive. But the Inuit are Indigenous peoples mainly associated with the Arctic regions or the northern regions in Canada. Traditionally, Inuit lived a nomadic migratory lifestyle, traveling from winter camp to summer camp, depending on the hunting cycles. Colonialism in this region began actually very recently, in the 1950s and the 1960s. And like in other Indigenous communities in Canada, the effects of colonialism continue to be devastating. Government policy was, and arguably still is, designed to make the North more like the South. So colonialist practices included the Inuit relocation program, which was sort of forced settlements, the killing of kimit or sled dogs, and the removal of Inuit children from their families where they were put in residential schools, often in the South. That said, Inuit communities are among the most culturally resilient in North America. And after years of hard-fought negotiations, Inuit have constitutionally protected Aboriginal rights, title to land, and self-government agreements. There are around 70,000 Inuit in Canada, and about 30% live outside of the North. And Southern migration is largely due to food insecurity, lack of access to healthcare, housing, education, jobs, and just a general cost of living crisis in the North. And the vast majority actually live in the Ottawa region. And that's Ottawa in the background. And this has led to the establishment of organizations like Inuktitut and TI. I think some people here have worked with TI. So given this background info, I want to turn to why the PLE program, the Inuktitut program, was so, what I think is successful, empowering, and transformative. But before I do that, I would be remiss if I didn't mention my friend and coworker, Eki Okungbawa. Eki was the OGEN lead in Ottawa on this program. And Eki has an education background, not a law background. And I think it's largely because of Eki that this program was youth-led and community-focused, not lawyer-led and law-focused, which I think was really important. I also want to commend OGEN for thinking outside of the box with this program, outside of the sort of traditional PLE program box with this program, and trusting the process. So why do I think it's so successful? It was critical, it was youth-led, and it was community-focused. The program began with a legal needs assessment, which we conducted in March of last year. And that involved a focus group with about 13 youth from the Inuktitut community. The youth gave many examples of common legal issues specifically related to the urban Inuit youth experience. So housing problems were related to native housing in Vanier, which is a suburb of Ottawa, and discrimination was Inuit-specific racism. The youth also talked about how they were taught to fear police, to not get involved with them. One participant even asked us if we knew about the police slaughtering sled dogs up north. These stories, I think, speak to the damage that colonialism has brought on the Inuit and the ongoing generational trauma that's transferred to the youth, even in urban environments. Given this critical context, we knew it would have been impossible and quite frankly offensive to teach traditional everyday law workshops to this group. We knew we'd need to encourage dialogue about how and why the law as written just wasn't the lived experience of these young people. And rather than see the youth as alienated from the dominant legal system, we wanted to see the law from their perspective. We also wanted to ensure that Inuit youth were involved in every stage of the program. So 3 of the youth that were involved in the original focus group volunteered to become our youth leadership team, and they're in the bottom there, those 3. So we called them the YLT, Youth Leadership Team. The YLT had all grown up in Inuktitut programming. They were dedicated to celebrating Inuit culture, and they were strong advocates of the urban Inuit voice. So the YLT was the driving force of the program. They met with us month after month over the summer last year to co-design, co-develop, and ultimately co-facilitate the 6-week program that ran last fall. The YLT also took control of the program space, and they provided a space. The building up here was the Inuktitut Youth Building. This is a sort of an after-school hangout space that the youth can go to and get dinner and play video games and just sort of chill. This is a safe space for the youth, and it's also a dynamic space that has its own energy. And I think most importantly, the space belongs to the youth. And so we as like OGen organization, we had to be invited in. That leads me to my next point. Given the youth's critical views of the justice system and coming from a settler justice organization like OGen, we knew that if we wanted to empower the youth, we needed to take a slow approach and build trust within the community. And that trust we felt had to start with the YLT. Like I said, we met with the YLT month after month from April to October for program planning, and this is the flyer that the YLT created and with details of the program on the flyer. During these planning meetings, the YLT made a program planning playlist that we listened to at the start of every meeting. If a planning meeting was scheduled for 2 hours, we often took the first hour just to share a meal, chat about life, get comfortable with each other. We tried to approach every meeting with humility and vulnerability. And so slowly over the course of the summer, we were able to gain the trust of the YLT, which sort of filtered through the program to the other participants. And they were empowered to take ownership of the program ultimately. Of course, there was a lot of toe tapping and watch checking about sticking to funding work plans and reporting periods. And we had to push back a little bit from Ottawa. We knew that this process of trust building was crucial, and it didn't necessarily fit within the funders' interim reporting periods. In the end, what may have taken 2 months to complete with a different community took 8 months for us. And I became an expert at writing about delay in the what challenges have you experienced in this reporting period section of the funding reports. It's funny, but it's not, because the delay was being framed as a challenge in these reports, but actually I think it was part of the success of the program. So I think this program was not only successful and empowering for the youth, but I think it was also transformative because it decentered the common law. And I'll explain what I mean by that. So very generally, legal pluralism, it's a concept that recognizes a multiplicity of legal orders interacting and operating in the same space. So in Canada, we recognize the common law system, we recognize the civil law system in Quebec, and we're slowly, finally acknowledging distinct Indigenous legal traditions, orders. So for this program, in most cases, we tried to give space to Inuit traditions first. This is Elder David doing a teaching on sharpening ulus. Common law second. Oops. By the way, common law second. This is a lawyer from the CLSO named Sarah. The YLT thought that a mix of common law and Inuit traditions was, quote, very, very important. And so they identified 3 elders who began participating in the program planning in the summer. And then the elders came to every single session. It was a 6-week program, and the elders attended every session, but they didn't just come and do an opening and leave. They stayed for the entire session, and they participated in the teachings and the common law content. The elders also expressed a need to bring in the Inuit Maligat, which is the closest thing to what we would call law in Inuit culture, and it literally means big things that must be followed. They also wanted to bring in the IQ principles, which are social values or Inuit worldview, that all Inuit are taught when they're young. And IQ loosely translates into what Inuit has known all along. And even thinking about them as principles is sort of colonized, but it's bigger than that. But I'm part of the I'm part of the colonizers, I guess, and it's easier to conceptualize for you guys, I think. So examples include of IQ and Maligat include working for the common good and maintaining respectful relationships with living and non-living things. And these principles, or this worldview, was practiced organically in that space. So for example, when the elders came in, intuitively, the youth would welcome them, make sure they were seated in a comfortable chair, serve them tea. The elders always ate first. And this was just how it went. It was sort of Inuit governance operating in the space. For each session, it began with a short teaching and the lighting of the kuluk, which Elder Ripa is doing. She's doing both in the bottom picture. Before any substantive content, we shared meals and we played Inuit games. And the games were whatever the youth felt like playing that day. So they taught us how to play dice games and oven mitt games and string games and whatever kind of games they wanted. It was fun, and it was sort of like to get the juices flowing before the boring law or whatever the topic was that day. So there were also standalone sessions dedicated to elder teachings, traditional tool making, and restorative justice. But the Maligat and the IQ were even integrated into the common law content, which was always focused on the legal issues that the youth raised in the original focus group. So OJAN staff and justice sector volunteers led sessions on legal life skills, housing, income support, and human rights. And often the elders would step in and share their own knowledge and experience on the topic. I think the YLT, I interviewed all the YLT after the program was finished, and one of the YLT members captured this multi-juridical sort of legal pluralism really well with this quote. So, quote, "Lawyers know all the legal stuff, but elders with their life experience and telling you about it and learning from it also teaches the youth that it's okay." So I just want to end, I know I probably have less than a minute, but with something I've called alternative evaluation methods, specifically for contexts like this. So this project was funded under like PLE project funding. I want to problematize that a little bit. So for a program like this one, it's really difficult to measure success using conventional PLE evaluation frameworks. I've already touched on obstacles like time constraints. We also had issues with quantitative data collection and post-program evaluation surveys. We just didn't get many completed back. There also tends to be an expectation to have concrete, replicable outcomes in order to gain ongoing project funding. But these rigid expectations that are put on outcomes reduces the value of the process. And I think in this context, there was so much value in the process of creating this program. I'm about to end. I was chatting with an Inuit staff after the program, and I was talking about this issue. And he said, quote, "We can't replicate the framework, even if we did it with the same people in the same space. It would be a different living space." He said, "Replication embodies colonial expectations, and we would not be able to replicate it and still be in line with Indigenous views of justice." So funding reports became a kind of creative writing process. And in the end, I think the success of the program was best illustrated by the fact that the youth kept coming back week after week. So did the elders. And the Inuit staff explained to me that for this community, that was, quote, "a good sign." Thank you.
Does anybody else? I say anybody else because I already have a question, but does anybody have any questions?
That was really interesting, thank you. You mentioned that when you started working with the youth, you had to approach things slowly to build their trust. What was your experience when you approached the center to be a partner in this project?
They were very keen. They wanted to partner with us, and they really thought, I think they're sort of, I don't want to say starved for programming, but when things come along that they feel are needed, would be beneficial for the youth, they would come on board. And we did consult with somebody from Indigenous Youth Services about the whole, just even the approach. So we knew we were open and honest and sort of laid out our ideas, but also we really wanted them to know that we were there to support. We wanted to create this program, but we didn't know what it was going to be, and we needed, their input would sort of dictate whatever the program eventually would be. So I think, yeah, I guess we went in just honestly and ready to create whatever. Yeah.
Yes.
Hello, thank you. That was incredible, inspiring. I just have so many questions. But I just want to pick up on your last point around evaluation. So back in Australia, we had a project working with our local First Nations communities. It was called Strong Safe Elders. The evaluation component always felt oppressive, felt colonialist, and just so wholly inappropriate. It was so wonderful to hear what you said about evaluation, but I wondered how you went about addressing that with the funders.
It was creative, and I mean, they were open to it. I would write like paragraphs about the challenges and write and sort of say, well, this was a collective, collaborative program, and to put individual test-like surveys on these youth at the end of it, like they just didn't want it, so your methods just didn't work. And I mean, we didn't lose funding, so.
Sounds like you told a story and that was impactful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I wondered if you could just give us another minute or so on, and maybe my question is wrong-headed, but you tell me if that's the case. The idea of non-Indigenous organizations, structuring, and I really appreciate your, approaching the project with humility, being open and allowing it to unfold and develop as it would. But it's one of the things that we think about a little bit is this, not a little bit, a lot.
Yeah.
How is it that non-Indigenous organizations can meaningfully engage and provide good programming?
Yeah, Eki and I were very afraid of this from the beginning. I think like OGEN is a settler organization, we're staffed by settlers. And so if we were to have taken the cultural teachings and taught them to the youth, I think that would have just been like absolutely inappropriate. But the way that, I guess in a perfect world, we would have nothing to do with this education because it's, it's not ours, but we had money. And when we met with the Indigenous Youth Services rep, we were given some ideas. So everybody was compensated. They wanted to be there. They set the rates. We sort of just wanted to support them to create whatever teachings they wanted to. And because we built so much trust and went in openly, if we made mistakes, but if we made them, there was enough comfort to talk them through and to dialogue and all of that. So I think there's danger in settler organizations offering Indigenous programs for sure. But I think you can do it in a way that's, there's one quote I took out of it, but, well, there's a couple, but one of the youth said, she thought it was really surprising because not a lot of organizations outside of Inuktitut or Inuit cultures, they don't pay attention to IQ principles, they don't value it, but you guys valued it, you guys just understood it and implemented it into the OGEN program. Another youth said OGEN actually engaged and wanted to learn from the community, and we're not like, oh, I'm helping these Inuit people and I'm a white savior. You were actually listening, and we could all tell that you appreciated like literally almost everything. And one of the staff said that he said that we were being transparent with walking the path towards reconciliation, which I thought was just such a compliment. So we didn't get pushback. I interviewed everybody afterwards, and there was no misrepresentation on our part, or at least they didn't tell us about any. So we just tried our best, I guess. Yeah.
So thank you. I want to start by telling you how pleased I am to be here with all of you today. I want to acknowledge the lands of the First Nations, Métis and Inuit people who have stewarded them, cared for them for all of these years since time immemorial. I'm from Alberta, where I live on Treaty 7 territory, and I work in Treaties 6, 7, and 8 territories across Alberta. And I'm really honored to be invited here today and to have a room so full of people still at this time. So I'm going to jump right into it. The Reforming Family Justice System Initiative is what I'm going to talk with you about today. And the RFJS, which is the acronym that we use, is a multi-sector, multi-year initiative that grew out of this kind of very strong statement that you see on the slide and that is often made about the family justice system. Our work is aimed at improving outcomes for families who are dealing with family justice issues. It's a large collaboration. It's been convened by the Court of King's Bench of Alberta, the Alberta Court of Justice, the Law Society of Alberta, the Ministry of Justice of Alberta, Family and Community Services in the County of Strathcona, Native Counselling Services of Alberta. We have hundreds of collaborators that are engaged in this work from across many different sectors. And really, the RFJS is a movement for systems transformation. It's about telling a new story of family justice. The work arose directly from the reports of the National Action Committee on Access to Justice, which were published in 2013. So this initiative has been underway for 11 years already, and we're a long ways from being done. Both the Beyond Wise Words report on family law and the roadmap report of the Action Committee called for a paradigm shift and for drastic change, and that is the focus of the RFJS initiative in Alberta. What we see is that while there's tremendous concern about our justice systems and an appetite for change that's often expressed with terms like paradigm shift and transformational change, to be honest, there's not a lot of expertise or experience in doing this. So big calls for change tend to be answered by incremental programmatic efforts that are actually about improving our existing system. By contrast, our work in Alberta and more recently in BC and a growing number of jurisdictions across the country is taking a much larger systems transformation approach to the wicked problems of the family justice system. When we show this slide to members of the public who have experienced family justice processes or who know others who have been involved in separation, divorce, family violence, or child welfare matters, they nod their heads. And we start here because this helps to underline the urgency for change. There really wasn't guidance in the Action Committee report about how we go about changing a paradigm. Indeed, we actually now see the reports as calling for a paradigm shift by making recommendations that are about improving the existing paradigm. So there's a little bit of a conflict in the way that the reports were framed. In fairness, the concept of a paradigm or a culture shift is perhaps one of the most challenging concepts to describe. We often don't realize that we operate in paradigms. It's just the way we see the world. Some important systems experts have written about this and helped us to understand that this is about opening up our minds to imagine what's possible. A very powerful description of paradigm shifts was written by Danella Meadows, where she explained, and I often think was trying to console her readers, that systems change is often counterintuitive. We're used to thinking in a certain way, and that guides our actions. But if we're really going to bring about change, we need to think very differently. When we do this, we may even feel a little uncomfortable. So if you find yourself feeling that way today, it's okay. You're experiencing the kind of paradigm shift that the Action Committee called for and that we've been working with in Alberta for the last decade. The article that I mentioned is now a chapter in the book, Thinking in Systems, and in it, Meadows identified 12 places to intervene in a system, which she set out in the order of the least likely to bring about change, many of which are the kinds of things that we do when we're trying to bring about change, up to the most likely to bring about change. And what she identified as the two most likely ways to create this kind of big transformational change is, number 2, paradigms, or the ability to see the context that you're working in, and number 1, transcending paradigms, or the ability to stand outside of the system and see the other influences, systems, and contexts that need to be taken into account. So I want to share this adaptive loop diagram with you. One of our systems change facilitators shared this and explained to us, first off, that systems are always changing. What this diagram shows us is that every system, organization, or program begins down in the lower left-hand quadrant, where you have a new idea that is developed and grown to maturity in the upper right-hand quadrant. This space of maturity is where most systems, organizations, and programs spend the bulk of their time. If you read the words that are around the outside, they relate to each of the quadrants, and if you read the words in the center, they talk about the kinds of leadership. And what you can see is that the focus of leadership in the mature quadrant is on managing and conserving, and the traits of leadership are all about efficiency, stability, conservation, hierarchy, rules, and procedures. In every system, while you reach this point of maturity, you eventually reach the point of declining results, when it's not possible to continue and no amount of effort at managing will preserve the existing system. Here, this is reflected by the red star moving down the loop, and as we worked with facilitators and with our large group of collaborators, we talked about where were we on the adaptive loop, and this is where our collaborators placed themselves. Some of us are early adopters and we're way down into the release. Others are waiting and saying, prove it to me, show me what's really happening here, all of which is good and helpful. That red dot is moving into the space of release. And I think this area on the adaptive loop is very much the space that the Action Committee identified with its concerns about the harms that are happening in our family justice system. The RFJS initiative represents the release, exploration, and development of a new system. It's about transformation, or the paradigm shift that was called for in the Action Committee reports, and it will lead to something very different than what we've experienced previously. It's not like we can just close the family justice system while we try to think about what a new system is, though. And so you've got kind of this tension happening around funding and efforts and time that's spent between folks that are working so hard to maintain this existing broken system. And I can tell you, in every organization that I've worked in, the focus in the family justice system is huge. It's the busiest committee. It's where everybody is working hard because we have so many challenges there. So we need to keep that existing system operating, even while we recognize that we need to release and transform the system into something completely different. And so that means we have to be able to hold and work on both of these efforts at the same time, and not be feeling like we're fighting with each other for space. We need to understand that the types of effort that will improve an existing system are very different from those that will transform one. And so not be fooled into thinking that those things that you're doing to keep that existing system going are going to somehow magically change into something that's new. We also need to find a balance between how much energy and resources we will continue to pour into improving an existing system and how much we need to put into transformation of a new one. So those are all really important thoughts for people working in the system, for the funders, for all of us as we engage in this work. Paradigm shifts tend to be successful not only when there's concern about an existing system, but also when it's supported by new evidence. Think about campaigns to stop smoking, to make seatbelt use mandatory, to use blue boxes, or other environmental changes. New evidence, most often about harms, were behind these and helped to bring about change. In terms of the family justice paradigm shift, the new evidence that guides our work in Alberta is brain science. At the same time that the Action Committee reports were being released and discussed across the country, Justice Andrea Moen of the Alberta Court of King's Bench had become concerned about the impact of adversarial processes on families, and particularly children. She took a study leave to learn about brain science, and when she returned to the court, she sought to bring about changes on the basis of this evidence. Some of her initial changes would have been more in the nature of reforms, to be honest with you. But what we saw in Alberta was the call for a paradigm shift, and the knowledge that we had helped us to really think about the transformation that we understood was being called for. In Alberta, we have the benefit of something called the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative, which is an initiative of a private family foundation. And that foundation has done extensive research, education, knowledge mobilization, and implementation of brain science into policy and programs. And they've got a core story certification that is available anywhere in the world that you can take wherever you are. It's available in English and French at this point of time. And in the materials that I've provided that are in the Dropbox, you can find information about brain science. There's so much more to brain science than I can cover today, and people who are far better qualified to talk to about it than I can. But I want to spend a few minutes telling you about how we've made the connection between brain science and the family justice system. I'll just speak to you briefly about the Adverse Childhood Experiences Studies, or ACEs, which is what's on the screen right now. From these studies, we know that the impact of ACEs increase exponentially the more adverse childhood experiences a young person experiences. We see ACEs as directly relevant to family justice issues like this. If you look in the right-hand column, separation and divorce is one of the 10 ACEs. So we kind of own that one. Abuse, neglect, and other household dysfunction are the 3 categories of ACEs and are part of the situations arising in child welfare and family violence matters. What we've seen is that the family justice system often exacerbates and even causes toxic stress for children and adults involved with it, because it's based on an adversarial model of dispute resolution that encourages a win-lose paradigm of conflict rather than de-escalating conflict and creating conditions for collaborative decision-making. The consequences of high ACEs are extremely serious, and they include lifelong harms and even early death. So it really is no wonder that so many family justice reports have suggested that family justice processes do more harm than good. The science proves it. In spite of the really challenging outcomes that we see in the ACEs studies, there's also hope in the brain science knowledge. It helps us to know what causes harm and how we can prevent or reduce that harm. The story includes the story of resilience, which is where the hope comes from. There are 3 principles to build resilience, which were identified by the Harvard Center on the Developing Child and are important for reshaping policies and programs to ensure that we focus our approach on helping families to achieve healthy outcomes in spite of adverse experiences. In the RFJS, our collaborators have referred to this as helping families thrive. So that's really what we're trying to do. And we're focusing on all 3 of the Harvard Center principles. These 3 principles are represented by this resilience scale that you can see, which illustrates that we're working to provide positive supports, which we can achieve by helping families to gain the kinds of supports they need for their social, relationship, parenting, financial, and health challenge. And those are the green boxes on the heavy side of this particular scale. We're working to strengthen skills and abilities to manage stress, which can include executive functioning skills, and helping families to reduce conflict, to improve communication, and to learn better parenting skills. And that's represented by being able to shift the fulcrum and help to increase resilience. So that's the little fulcrum at the bottom. And we also are working to decrease negative experiences, which for us has been to reduce the role of legal adversarial processes, which we put into the red boxes on the top part of that scale. So for us, brain science is the evidence that guides, drives, and supports the paradigm shift. The RFJS is really all about children. It explains why we're doing the work that we're doing, but the next question that people always ask us is, how are we doing it? And I'm going to get into showing you some frameworks and some tools that we've been using, which are a little bit heavy, but hopefully the visuals will help to see the kinds of approaches that we're using. So we know that the work we're doing to transform the family justice system involves shifts in thinking, policy, organizations, programs, and resources, and it requires a commitment and leadership of a broad collaboration over time. This is called the GEALS framework, and it, for us, really helps us to visualize systems change by seeing that change happens at 3 levels simultaneously. The pink level up at the top is culture. The arrows show that there's movement from left to right, which we visualize as the move away from legal adversarial approaches on the left to family well-being on the right. And that's really our culture shift as called for by the Action Committee. The purple level at the bottom are the niche innovations, which are small experiments with new ideas. And that's the kind of experimental work that occurs to develop and test new ideas. And then the blue level in the middle is the system. This shows that there are many different players. All of those arrows are different organizations and players who are aligning their efforts while retaining their own independence. The system is influenced by changes in culture. You can see the pink arrows coming down, and influenced by the new ideas as they emerge. And together, the culture shift and the niche innovations put pressure on the system to change, resulting in changes in legislation, policy, and programs. As we move from left to right, the system is reshaped completely. We found just tremendous value in this framework, and our next step as we worked through these processes over these last dozen years or so has been to incorporate these concepts into strategies that address all 3 levels of change and bring it to action. Over the past, am I already like way past? No, all right, I just see activity over here. Over the past 4 years, we've been working with our counterparts in British Columbia and with a US company called Insight Formation to develop a joint strategy map and strategy engagement tools, which will more fully support the action that's occurring, including capacity development and the ability to build momentum by visualizing the work together. And we've incorporated this GEALS framework, so keep this thing in mind as I show you the next slide. I also want to just tell you that the folks that I work with at Insight Formation, we've done lots of speaking. We recently spoke at an international conference, and I'm happy to share with you some videos of webinars that we've done together and others have done around reshaping systems. And I can also tell you about some upcoming conference webinars that we're going to be doing where you can learn a little bit more about this. But this now is what our strategy map looks like. It was developed together by Alberta and British Columbia in 2020. And what I can tell you is that a strategy map is a way of representing a set of aligned strategies that are intended to bring about change. They are a robust way of thinking about aspirations and linking them to capacities. So at the very top, and I don't know how well you can see this, but that's our outcome objective, and it relates specifically to our goal of transforming the family justice system by focusing on achieving family well-being. The 3 principles that I've mentioned to you for creating resilience are up in that top level. They're the 3 yellow strategies from the left to the right that are looking at reducing toxic stress, strengthening core life skills, and building supports for families. At the bottom layer of the map, you see capacity development that helps to create a strong foundation for this work. We did a lot of work on capacity development in our early years, really, as well as a lot of work in teaching and learning about brain science and how it applied in the family justice system. But we continue to weave that knowledge in over time. And then when you move into the center of the map, you'll see here the GEALS framework that I mentioned to you. The 3 categories of the GEALS framework make up the 3 columns in here. So the left-hand column are the brain science knowledge and strategies around doing that, which are about the innovation and the culture shift. We've got the small niche innovations on the right-hand side, and then the big arrows pushing into the center where the system is. This strategy map is just one visual of the way that we do this work. And what you can actually do is work within a platform where you can drill down and find sub-strategies and develop those and develop actions and measures. And the whole thing is supported so that this big, complex process of change is captured in a platform that everybody can access. There are many things that I can tell you about what's been happening. I can't possibly tell you about all of them, and I'll just very quickly tell you about one that I think you'll find particularly interesting. Oh, it looks like I went past something. I want to go there. What I will describe is about work that we've undertaken in one community, the community of Grand Prairie, which is up in the northwest part of Alberta, where we've been exploring the possibility of shifting the path that families take in their family matters. Work in this community has been underway since March of 2020. We've held approximately 60 meetings and have undertaken many innovations with community members. Grand Prairie has essentially, it wasn't designed as this, but has essentially become a demonstration community for the RFJS. In recent months, we've been preparing to launch a significant pilot. As we did that, collaborators were asking themselves, because they were a little nervous about whether we could do this, are we ready enough? And they made sure it was ready enough. And what they said was, yeah, we think we're ready enough. We're going to keep working. We're going to keep doing this. We know it's not going to be perfect, but we're okay with that. More recently, an elder opening a national family law conference that I was able to attend asked participants, are you strong enough? And are you brave enough to do the right thing? And I think the community of Grand Prairie has said yes to those questions as well. So as you can see by the little red highlight on the innovation strategy that we've got there, the community has worked on ways to ensure that there are cross-sector supports for families for their social relationship, parenting, financial, and health issues as they deal with their family law matters. They're also making programs available to build skills in these areas when families need them. And we describe these efforts as an ongoing community readiness work that the RFJS and the community collaborators are helping to empower and support. At the same time, we've been working on another innovation strategy, which is to innovate ways to encourage or require nuances in the family justice system. And I told you that you can drop down into a platform where you can see sub-strategies. So that particular strategy now is up at the top, and we have sub-strategies being developed below, as well as the strategy around brain science that continues to infuse everything that we're doing. One aspect of the work that's been underway is in the green little boxes here, and that's a sub-strategy that is exploring the use of restorative approaches in family matters involving domestic violence. Another aspect that we're beginning to look at is an online model for separation and divorce that's in place in Denmark, and you can see we haven't done a lot on that yet, but we are talking about it and are really interested in pursuing that. In the middle is something that we call the King's Bench Court Prototype, which has become a pilot. During a recent study leave, Justice Rod Jerky, who's the Court of King's Bench co-convener on the RFJS, worked with members of the Grand Prairie community on many iterations of a prototype for a court pilot to support and align processes with the RFJS. I'm supposed to wrap up. I'm going to, but I've got a couple more slides I'm going to give you. In his study leave, Justice Jerky was able to work through with community members, everyone from psychologists to suicide prevention to people who have businesses in the community. It's a very broad collaboration, and heard their input and reframed and reshaped the pilot that he was thinking about until it got to a point that the collaborators said, yeah, we think it's ready to go. He wrote a study leave report, which is available. I can share it with folks who are interested. And in it, he writes recommendations for continued support of the RFJS by the court. By January of last year, he submitted a business case for a court pilot. The court approved the pilot, and we then created a community-based action team in Grand Prairie that drafted the notice to the profession and public that was issued by the court to develop education and to begin to develop evaluation programs. And that pilot was launched by the court and the community on Tuesday in Grand Prairie. I missed it. I was on a plane coming here. So I'm getting emails from folks telling me how great it was. The pilot empowers families to focus on their social relationship, parenting, financial, and health issues that are central to their family challenges, and to see the supports and skills that will help them to build resilience. We don't know yet how this is going to take shape for families, but we do know that there are already families that are going to a family resource network where they're getting referrals to these programs, that the folks in those programs are really excited about it, and we're anticipating that we're going to see a lower number of cases coming into court with matters that don't belong in courts, that have nothing to do with law. That will leave the courts able to deal with the legal challenges that they actually need to be addressing, and families will be less likely to experience the stresses of adversarial processes. It also means that the system will help to reduce the toxic effects of fighting about family matters, and that families will get the supports and build the skills they need to build resilience. And so this really moves us into the center of that GAILS framework, into that middle column where we're starting to shift the system. It's a very pivotal point in the RFJS initiative. There's going to continue to be many more innovations, but this one is pretty significant because of the players that are involved in it. And it's been possible not only because of the community feedback that Justice Jerky got and incorporated into his business case, but because of the work that the community did to be ready, to have the places that families could go to for the kinds of supports that we were imagining they would need. And we'll learn more from this. We'll scale it out as people are ready in other communities and to support other things. There's a lot of interest about this transformational change in Alberta. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have. As I said, I've included materials that you can access, but that includes my contact information, so feel free, and thank you. And I'm sorry, Mary, I ignored you.
So does anybody have any questions? Eden, yeah, come on up.
Hi, thank you to all the panelists. I learned a lot today, and these projects are very inspiring, so that counts for a lot of value. On the project we just heard about, I was very intrigued to hear that Alberta Judiciary is looking at brain science as a source of evidence for why, for particular changes. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit more about resilience and the mental health implications of the policies that you've been advancing. And a related question, in some of my own reading about trauma-informed approaches, there's what I find to be a clarifying, valuable focus on legal service providers talking more openly and looking more squarely at our own vicarious trauma that comes from serving traumatized clients as a necessary element of providing services that are trauma-informed cultivators of resilience, responsible to the brain science. So kind of two nested pieces, and thank you for considering.
Don't go too far away because I want to try to make sure I understand your questions. So the Court of King's Bench in Alberta has been learning about brain science, and this is because we have the Alberta Family Wellness Initiative. It is just kind of seeping into everything in Alberta right now across multiple areas. And so we've had neuroscientists and others from their organization come out and speak at judicial education programs. It's something that people increasingly understand the importance of. It's beyond trauma-informed. This is about actually avoiding and preventing the kinds of harm that occurs and shifting our systems so that we actually can do that. So it's not to say there's anything wrong with trauma-informed, but it actually is deeper than that. The Court of King's Bench, as all courts have had to do, they are recognizing judicial education, and judges are required to do a certain amount of judicial education, and the brain story certification is one of the things they've approved. So it's done by individual judges to complete this 25 to 30 hour 19 module course. So that's been built in, and the court has in its strategic plan adopted the Reforming Family Justice Initiative as something they're going to do. So they are adopting this, incorporating it, and in fact the Chief Justice of the Court of King's Bench was in Grand Prairie on Tuesday to open court. The judges who are going to sit on this pilot were all there, robed in the courtroom, and then they hosted a community reception to celebrate what was happening. So it's very much embedded. I don't know what else you wanted to know, though.
The second piece was, has your project had the opportunity as yet to explicitly consider this piece about the impact of the work upon those delivering it? And I'm sure that's a question that all the panelists might have views on. The emergent conversation about our own mental wellness, or more specifically, vicarious trauma and our own vicarious resilience.
We haven't dug into that deeply. Our counterparts in British Columbia actually started there and really have been thinking a lot about well-being of the service providers. I think it's kind of tied into everything we do. We're talking about well-being for everyone. And when we talk about the kind of change in the family practice for lawyers and advocates that are working in this field, what we're seeing is a very significant shift, and one that we believe is going to have that better approach for families, because we're not in there advocating for these kinds of changes. We're helping families to reach a good agreement. It's quite a shift in the way that we're dealing with these things, and we're walking the walk and talking the talk as we do this. So I think we're getting there. That will be one of the things that we're talking about. We've got that listed in some of our innovation strategies, but people just got very interested in this King's Bench pilot, and that's where a lot of energy has gone. Okay. There was somebody else that stood up there, but they gave up. Perfect.
Okay, great.
You're gonna
I
let me
thought,
go?
yeah, I'm going to let you go. Partly because if there are no other questions, what I thought I might do is ask folks to either weigh in on the question about, well, I have so many comments. Anyway, about whether there's anything that you'd like to say that you didn't have a chance to say already, and in particular answering to other questions.
Can I just say that you're looking at me like I look at people going, I want you to say something specific, and I'm channeling that through my eyes at you. I am going to make up a response to your question that I feel like you're asking. Two things. One is we have 3 service principles at SMLS, and being trauma informed is deeply ingrained and deeply felt and deeply administered, if that's a term. I know it's a word, whether it's a term. And I just, on that comment, the question around, vicarious trauma, specifically because we're talking about youth, what's been interesting is, we obviously are very conscious and do lots of training and stuff, but another case example, we have one of our junior lawyers has a young woman who came to Australia as a refugee, but her documents were inaccurate, and so they say that she's 3 years older than what she is, and she wants to stay at school and do a proper education to give herself opportunity, but the state school is wanting to move her out because technically on paper she's 17. And so Riz, our lawyer, has been working tirelessly with our migration lawyer, who said that it would be potentially very problematic if we go to Home Affairs and open up her immigration matter. So we've then been working closely with the school to try and convince the school to let her stay for another couple of years. That has been very, very trying on Riz. He's been deeply impacted about it. And I think the thing for me is just like, it's very, we're the older people in the room. It's like it's this sort of the divergence of issues, and particularly for me, from a youth perspective, understating the divergence of issues that impact young people, and then realising our teams aren't fully matured or equipped to deal with it, because even we haven't expected it. So yeah, just that's a comment on that resilience and trauma informed. Is that okay?
Perfect. Did you want to add anything? Okay. I think what I was hoping to have just a moment to say to wrap up is a huge thank you to our panelists. I think that the thread or river with which everything is connected today is on this issue of transformation. And partly that resonates really easily for me because I work in the world of children's rights. And I am a strong believer in the fact that the recognition of the human rights of children is actually a paradigm shift that very few people are ready for. And in fact, the family justice system is the least ready for it of any system. And I really appreciate the, from Chris's piece, the transformation about understanding young people and children as real agents and agents for change, agents for growth and development, not just of themselves, but of the systems in which we work or try to transform. And I think Nat really beautifully picked up on that in terms of really opening our minds and our approaches not only to the transformative power, agency, and wisdom of children and young people's participation, but how that works for us as settler and colonial places and spaces. Then to talk about how paradigm shifts. Nat and I had a small smile about paradigm shifts are hard to understand because that's what a paradigm is that you're just in there. So it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to listen to really creative, exciting ideas about justice and change and people and change. So thank you very much to everyone, and thank you for staying until 4:31 or so in the afternoon.